Welcome to Legal Aid of Northwest Texas and the Community Revitalization Project. Legal Aid of Northwest Texas is a nonprofit law firm that provides free civil legal services to low-income individuals, families, and groups who qualify for services. The Community Revitalization Project is one of the projects within Legal Aid that provides legal help to low-income individuals and groups and focuses on three basic areas: housing justice, environmental justice, and community development. Legal Aid of Northwest Texas works to advance and protect the rights of millions of low-income people by providing free civil legal assistance to ensure equal access to justice. Our nonprofit coaching team is now happy to present to you our latest project, which is the 501c3 course of classes to support community groups in maintaining tax-exempt compliance. Thank you for joining us.
I will kick us off. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We're very glad to have this time with you all. And just by way of introduction, I'll say that myself, Eleazar, Sam, a couple of us here with you tonight are with Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, which is a nonprofit law firm. We work in North Texas and in West Texas, and we work on kind of civil areas of law, primarily serving individual clients. Eleazar and myself and Marcus Bramer are part of a project called the Community Revitalization Project, where we focus on assisting. We have a focus on working with neighborhood associations and community groups, and we look to work with these types of community-based organizations around topics such as affordable housing, environmental justice, and community development. And these nonprofit coaching workshops are part of that, thinking that a lot of groups that are working on excellent things at the local level often need more resources and information about nonprofit sustainability and capacity building. So tonight, the last couple of sessions we've talked about the IRS 990, but today what we're going to really focus on is corporate governance topics. And Sam is going to kind of give us some big picture insights onto that. So Sam, can you tell us a little bit more about nonprofit corporations and their boards?
Yes, I can. What is a nonprofit corporation? It is a paper entity acknowledged by the state with an identifying federal tax ID number, and which is able to operate a business in support of the general public with rights and reporting responsibilities. The nonprofit designation is given by the state and is separate from the tax-exempt designation, which is given by the IRS. Generally speaking, when you're creating a nonprofit corporation, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. First, there are regulatory requirements, and then there are fiscal needs. The regulatory requirements are, number one, to obtain a tax identification number, or an EIN, which, for those of you that don't speak code, stands for actually employer identification number. But you get that from the IRS. You do a bunch of paperwork, you submit forms, and sooner or later the IRS will send you a letter, which is called a 501c3 letter, assuming that you're approved under IRS code section 501c3. You get a tax ID number. And at the same time, you incorporate, which means you have to file state paperwork. There are annual filings at both the state and the federal levels. The federal is called the 990, the Internal Revenue Service form number 990. And the state has some filing requirements as well, which eventually you can receive permission to not have to file on an annual basis under certain circumstances. Then you acquire revenue, and you have to report on that through your IRS 990, and also through state forms. And as I said before, your tax exemption is recognized by the IRS in the form of a letter, which tells you what section of the IRS code you are approved under, which for nonprofit organizations is Section 501c3. Fiscal needs, you need a bank account. You need a record-keeping system, which used to be a massive pile of papers in a book, which is now software on a computer. And there are a number of computer programs. The most recognizable name may be QuickBooks. You designate your chief financial officer, which can be a controller, a comptroller. I've never understood the difference between those two words, but evidently there is a difference. A chief financial officer or director of financial services, or however you want to call that person, the person who is in charge of keeping your records, your financial records, that is. You establish a chart of accounts, which is an accounting term, and then you manage reporting of financial results. Corporate requirements for nonprofit governance. There is a board of directors which makes policy decisions and directs the nature of the organization. The board approves the corporate business plan, which includes a budget, financial statements, and there are board meetings periodically throughout the year. All of this is laid out, by the way, in bylaws, which are written as part of the formation of the organization. The board also oversees financial oversight, which, depending on the size of the organization, may involve an outside independent auditor. And they oversee and approve nonprofit filings to the state and federal governments, which would be state tax forms, federal tax forms, that sort of thing.
Hopefully everyone can read this one. I can walk us through this document here. This is something we'd like to get out to all of you, but here I want to talk about the left column. This is at the top, we're discussing kind of compliance requirements, regulatory requirements that nonprofit 501c3s need to regularly file in order to maintain both their status as a federal 501c3 tax-exempt organization, as well as a nonprofit corporation in the state of Texas. Those are some of the forms on the lower half. So for the federal filing, you need to file your annual tax filing, either the 990, the 990EZ, or the 990N in most instances, right? There are certainly some exceptions. But what we have here in the middle column, we identify efile.form990.org and another one, expresstaxexempt.com. These are two vendors that have software, like Sam was saying, a similar type of software program. But this is for when you want to prepare your 990 and you want to use a vendor software similar to how TurboTax has a vendor software for filing your personal income tax. And we have in the third column the due date. Now you only need to file one, right, for the federal tax filing. It's either the 990, the 990EZ, which is a shorter version of the 990, or a very short version of the 990N, which is more like a postcard. And so what we describe here in the third column is when it's due. Typically it's due around May 15th for organizations, or more specifically, it's due, is it 5.5 months after your fiscal year ends? So we've just listed here May 15th annually. On your very far right column, you have a few links that can bring you to either the IRS if you're looking for more information. The IRS also has tutorials and information for nonprofit organizations on their website. But more specifically, these two vendors, you can look at their material and even use their vendor material to prepare your 990 annual tax filing. And of course, that's a report of your nonprofit organization's revenues and expenses, and you're describing through kind of filling out this 4-page document. If you're using the 990EZ, You're describing through financial information what your revenue and expenses are. On the left column, the second half, we've listed several state filing requirements. These are things that are needed to be filed with different state entities, state regulatory entities, on a timely basis. The first two here we've listed are May 15th annually. The third one, Form 80, so the Form 5-102 Public Information Report naming directors. That's going to describe your board of directors, your various board members. Form 05-163 no tax due report. You're saying after you've done all your state formation, then you go on way back many years before, right? You formed your nonprofit corporation at the state level. Then you went on to form your nonprofit organization to request federal tax exempt status. This is kind of related to that in that now what you're doing through Form 05-163, no tax due report, you're saying you're a tax exempt nonprofit organization and no tax is due. So those are two documents. Additionally, Form 802 periodic report on nonprofit corporation, confirm name and address for groups or registered agent. That's something you're filing with the Texas Secretary of State, listed in column 2. That's telling the Texas Secretary of State who is the registered agent or the designated person for your nonprofit organization to receive any type of legal information, the key entity. And that's, of course, required for other types of corporations in Texas as well. Here we have on the very bottom document, we say recommended state filing in year 1. We recommend that nonprofit organizations, when they're 501c3s, they go ahead and form this document, Form AP-205, Texas Application for Exemption, Charitable Organization used to obtain franchise tax exemption and Texas Hotel and Sales Tax exemption. And look at this specifically. Once AP-205 is approved, Form 163 above is no longer filed annually. So this is a time savings. If you can do this bottom form in the last year, it gives you a way out of having to file the above Form 05-163 every year, right? So we want to share this type of information because we know it's a long process to get an organization's 501c3 status. And of course, once you get it and are in the process of conducting your operations and services, you need to still maintain these regular regulatory compliance requirements as a board, right? You need to be active and do what you can as a board to review your documents and to approve your documents as a board and submit them on a timely basis, both the federal tax filing as well as these smaller state regulatory requirements, to save yourself the headache of losing status as a nonprofit organization or having the IRS revoke your status, or to receive a tax bill from the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. These are some of the key documents that we want to make sure you have on your calendar or in your board book to make sure that as a board you're meeting your regulatory compliance requirements. We want to bring your attention here. There's a document listed on the bottom line called Legal Toolkit for Texas Nonprofits. And this was published in 2018. It was published by a group that we work with called Community Building with Attorney Resources, or CBAR. And they're, I think, a project of another legal aid organization. And what they have here on their texascbar.org website is this Texas Toolkit, Legal Toolkit for Texas Nonprofits. And that is a resource document that can really give you a good, an in-depth overview of different practices your nonprofit organization and board can maintain in order to make sure if you have questions, this can field some of your questions, but it's also a good way to map out how you might handle your regulatory issues and additional issues that come up. So we are happy to share that resource with you.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to ask Sam to give us his wisdom on the fiduciary portion of governance for a nonprofit.
My wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is you want, the answer is no, Elias. The roles and responsibilities of officials within an organization. Let's take an example. The board of the Sample Nonprofit Corporation formed an ad hoc committee to explore ways to address security for the company's emails, computer security, online security. The committee completed their research and recommended that the company contract with one of 3 cyber risk protection companies, each with different packages for protection levels and costs. The board had not yet acted on that recommendation when the company leadership notified the executive committee that they discovered a breach in the email security for one employee. Fortunately, no damage was done, but the incident placed urgency on the issue of making email more secure, and the issue needed to be addressed as soon as possible prior to the next full board meeting, which was when the board would vote to approve the expenditure of funds to acquire one of those 3 systems. This is just one example of a situation where an executive committee could have convened and made a timely upper-level decision regarding the best interests of the organization. In other words, approving the purchase of one of those 3 systems. So an executive committee was the original purpose of executive committees was to review major issues that organizations face and make preliminary decisions for discussion and voting at the next full board meeting. Over time, many organizations have made the executive committee a standing committee that meets shortly before the full board does, and then acts as sort of a steering committee. The makeup of executive committees are as different as the boards that represent organizations. Each organization's bylaws award executive committees varying degrees of authority and responsibility. For instance, there is something in the Texas State Legislature called the Legislative Budget Board. Now, when I first came to Texas, I heard this name and I had no idea what it was. And someone explained to me that the Texas legislature meets once every 2 years for a 6-month period. And there are some, by the way, who believe that they meet too frequently. Be that as it may. The Legislative Budget Board exists to make budgetary decisions when the legislature is not in session. They would, in effect, be a form of an executive committee, in this case of the Texas legislature. In any event, the makeup of executive committees are as individual as the boards they represent. Each law's bylaws award executive committees varying degrees of authority and responsibility. Officers of the board include a chair, vice chair, or more than one vice chair, secretary, and treasurer, and they make up the basic membership of the executive committee. And if the bylaws allow it, the executive committee makes important decisions in lieu of a full board vote. The executive committee may also include chairs from finance committee, quality committee, governance committees, and one or more at-large members. The Legal Aid of Northwest Texas Board, for instance, has one at-large member on its executive committee. There are distinct advantages for the CEO, executive director, and the organization to have an executive committee. A CEO can rely on the executive committee to discuss matters that are highly confidential or issues not yet ready to have a formal full board discussion about. It's often easier for smaller executive committees to get together on an emergency or unplanned basis than a larger board in between board meetings, where most of the work is done in smaller committees. Executive committees also handle routine matters that would otherwise take up the full board's limited time. The disadvantages of having an executive committee would be they can become too powerful, making themselves superior to the rest of the board. Executive committee members need to be sensitive to making other board members feel part of the process. When other board members begin to suspect that the executive committee is making all the decisions before they reach the full board, it might be time for the board to have a self-assessment. the ideal structure of an executive committee, and how it relates to a full board of directors. What authority should an executive committee ideally be given? In a 2009 report by the Governance Institute, the most common structure is a model where executive committees meet on an as-needed basis. The organization's bylaws spell out specific duties of the executive committee. Executive committees that also serve as governance or nominating committees are typically responsible for bylaws, policy review, board education, board self-assessment, new member orientation, and board succession planning. These duties may come with full or partial authority, which will also be spelled out in the bylaws. The traditional model of executive committees still works well for many organizations. If it's not broke, there's no need to fix it. When board members start to feel overshadowed by an executive committee that's taking on too much responsibility, that could be a red flag that it's time to evaluate the roles, responsibilities, and duties of the executive committee in relation to the needs of the board and the organization as a whole. The self-evaluation should review how boards operate in today's business environment. Technology has made it much easier to meet by teleconference, video conference, and email than ever before. The ease of communication among board members means that boards are customizing the structure of the organization's governance to fit their own definitions of good governance. And now we go to the next slide, which is duties. Duties of care, duties of loyalty, duties of obedience. In the case of duties of care, board members actively participate in governance and oversight of the organization's activities. Loyalty, board members act in the best interest of the organization at all times. And obedience, board members ensure that the organization carries out its purpose and does not engage in unauthorized activities or activities that would water down the purpose of the organization. Nonprofit boards of directors have certain core functions. The first, and I don't say this because I'm paid as a professional fundraiser, I say this because it's important. The first of these is fundraising and development. Then there is strategic planning and performance evaluation, fiscal oversight, selection and support of executive leadership, and board development. Nonprofit board member duties include things like legal and fiduciary duties, which we've already discussed. Boards hire and set compensation for paid management and staff. Generally speaking, the executive staff will recommend various pay levels depending on the type of job that an individual is doing, and the board will consider it and take it into account, discuss it, and then approve or modify what the executive staff has recommended. Advance the mission of the organization, maintain best governance practices, and become advocates for the organization's mission. Nonprofit board member duties also include board development, serving on committees, fundraising, reviewing meeting agendas and minutes, and planning for board succession and also for executive succession. Nonprofit board member roles are a little more complicated. An executive committee needs to convene and make a timely upper-level decision regarding the best interest of the organization. The executive committee's purpose and membership. The original purpose of executive committees was to review major issues that organizations face and make preliminary decisions for discussion and voting at the next full board meeting. And we've gone over a lot of this information already. Officers of the board include the chair, the vice chair, etc. The benefits of having an executive committee, there are distinct advantages. Basically, it gives the CEO, executive director more flexibility. And that is very important. In order for the organization to be able to make decisions in a quick fashion so that they can act, there has to be a body of people that the executive director can go to approve certain actions. The disadvantage of having an executive committee basically comes down to if the executive committee takes over too much power and the rest of the board doesn't feel like they're really part of the process, then the board becomes alienated from the executive committee and the organization becomes dysfunctional. And structuring an executive committee, as we've previously discussed, we can now go on to nonprofit board member responsibilities, which include the fundamental responsibility of board members is to provide oversight for the fulfillment of the mission to the benefit of the community at large. The board sets the direction for the organization, provides financial oversight, establishes policy, and supports the agency's generation of adequate resources to carry out its mission. Now, what that means is that last part supports the agency's generation of adequate resources to carry out its mission. Board members should be helping you raise money so that you can function. And they should also, you can go to them to come up with ideas on how the organization can generate revenues. Nonprofit boards of directors are governed by a comprehensive set of rules called bylaws. And the board should periodically review those bylaws to make sure they're still effective for purposes of governance and that they still comply with relevant law. And again, the executive committee usually includes the board's officers as well as possibly the immediate past chairman or president and one or two at-large members.
Thank you, Sam. I can share a little bit on, because we were covering fiduciary as well as requirements of actual physical filings, and I didn't want to add to the way that Nancy had presented it because it was clear, but I do want to go back to this form down here. It's an application. When you get your 501c3 designation, the form is a half a page long in which you put in the information on the organization, the EIN and the name of the organization and the address. And you submit this small application with a copy of your 501c3 letter from the IRS, and then you no longer have to concern yourself with filing the franchise tax report that we were discussing previously. So it pretty much allows you to do away with a specific report, which if you do not file that report, your organizational standing will no longer be good. So you will fall off good standing with the state. So that's why it's important that if you have a 501c3, you just get Form AP 205, sign it, and send it via any one of these portals to the state so that you have less reporting on you.
We have Miss Green who's raising her hand, or it just went away.
I am totally confused about this.
That's my intention. I know it was me, Regine. I know it was me.
No, I understand.
That's why we're here, Regine, to confuse you.
I understand about the 990 and 990 NEZ. However, there was this other form that you said we're required to file every 4 or 5 years. Did I see that?
Yes.
What, okay, which one was that?
There is the state of Texas and there is the federal government. The
Yeah.
federal government requires you to file a Form 990, one of those with a letter after it.
Okay,
Either an N, an EZ, or just a plain 990.
yes, sir.
The state requires you to file, and here, Eliezer, please take it away because I don't know what I'm talking about from here on in.
Okay. So the state requires that you let, and what I meant to say before, which I really confused everything up, the state is changing the system, because before you had to file 2 different forms and you had to enter through a portal to do 2 different forms. Well, now they're combining those 2. So those 2 are 05102 and 05163. One is the public information, which reports the directors of the corporation. 163 is the no franchise tax due. Now you need to understand that the no franchise tax due is a filing that all the organizations in the state have to do unless they file to not have to file it. And the reason why a nonprofit would want to file that is because to start with, the threshold under which the form no tax due is filed, the organization is signing off on that they did not make in excess of $1 million in the previous year. So the Form 163 no tax due report goes away. And because it goes away, if you're not going to miss a deadline, which is May 15th annually, because if you miss the deadline, they sort of like deactivate your entity. They move it again from good standing to not in good standing, and then you have to go through another process to get it reinstated. Does that make things clearer, Regine?
No, it's scary. It's scary.
What?
Because I said, it makes me, it's frightening. It's scary because I've never heard of this before. I became a nonprofit in 2015, and this is the first time I've ever heard of anything like this. So does that mean that they don't even have a record of our organization, even though I've been filing the 990?
Well, the 990 is filed with the IRS, the 990N, which is what I would estimate that you've been filing.
Yeah.
But my recommendation then would be, hold on, okay, so I'm trying to show you what to do here, but I need to have, you go in and you set up your account, and then you tell them, this is my organization, and then you put in your 11-digit tax number that you got from the state, and then it enters you into, and it shows you everything that you filed and everything that you're missing. Okay. And if your organization is not active, the state will charge you, I would say after the first year that they begin to charge you, they'll charge you $40 per report that you're filing. So if you have 4 reports that are due, that the state will show you, you need to fill this report and pay your fee for each of those. Hopefully that helps.
Oh, Joy, thank you so much.
Okay.
Well, no, actually, it's Rita.
Hi.
Hi. Just to let the lady know about the franchise tax. I was in her same position and didn't realize that my organization had been cut off from the state until I went to sell some land. And then we found out that we couldn't make the sale until we became, recognized by the state again. So we had to do all of those reports, which was about 10 years worth, go and pay the money. It was $50 actually per report. We had to take it into the it was the franchise office. We had to take it in. They gave us a letter. Then we had to do an application with the state of Texas and show them that letter before they would then reinstate us. So we have been reinstated, but it was a little process that had to be done. So
thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the office that actually handles this for the state, as far as I understand it, is at the Zhang building where legal aid is located as well. which I thought was interesting. I don't know that they're actually taking in paper applications anymore because they've been shifting the system. But what I have seen is that once you get into their system in the controller's office, it's relatively simple for you to see, I am missing these items. And then it tells you, besides this, you need to be recertified and you need a recertification letter. And so you need to click here to get that process done once you filed the annual reports that are missing. So definitely, thank you, ladies, for those comments. The issue is, it's not that it's scary. It's a learning thing, and if you approach it as, okay, this is something that we're gonna do next year, and we have a list of the things that we're gonna do, and we know how to file this because you've been dealing with it, then as Sam was speaking, there is a fiduciary duty that you owe to the organization to know these things, to understand how these things affect the organization that you are caring for.
This is the conclusion of this session intended to instill capacity into grassroots nonprofits. The nonprofit coaching team would like to thank you for your presence and participation. We look forward to sharing with you in our next class.
So let's, keep it up. We appreciate your questions. If there's any other question or a raised hand, I'd like to take that now.
This is the conclusion of this session intended to instill capacity into grassroots nonprofits. The nonprofit coaching team would like to thank you for your presence and participation. We look forward to sharing with you in our next class.
We're going to ask if there is anyone out there who has a question that they would like us to delve a little bit more into.
Does anyone have any organizational issues that we could help with, at least in general terms?